Hi everyone, this is the last lesson in our HTML unit for the course. So I thought what I'd do is wrap things up with some various odds and ends about HTML. So this course is really moving fast. We're not diving too deeply into all the gory details, but we're just giving you a good overview to get you started with your web programming career. So I've chosen some topics just to kind of finish up with here. Why don't we go ahead and create a new file inside of our HTML folder. So I'll right click on the HTML folder and choose new file, and then let's save it right away. So do Control S, and let's save this as HTML odds and ends, and I'm putting dashes in there. I can type this just right: HTML-odds-and-ends.html. So that'll be our file name. Let's go ahead and put in the boilerplate code. So type in HTML and hit tab right away. We'll indent the head and the body elements. That's been a good practice for us to do. Just like that. We'll give it a title: HTML odds and ends. And then we'll go ahead and make the H1 element say the same thing here. So we'll put an H1 element here in the body, and we'll have it say the same thing. Okay, now we're ready to get going. So the first thing that we're going to go over are entity characters. So there's all sorts of symbols that you might want to use in your page. For example, one that's real common that you'll see in the footer of a lot of websites is the copyright symbol. So to do that, I'm going to put my cursor right here underneath the H1. Now this looks kind of funny, but put an ampersand and then type in copy and then a semicolon. Let's go ahead and save this and see what this looks like in the browser. So I'm going to do Control S, and then we're going to open this up in the browser. So right click on the background and choose Open in Browser, and here's what I'm seeing here, and here's our copyright symbol. Okay, so there's all kinds of different entity characters for different symbols, and on the article that goes with this video you'll find a reference for them too. Let me show you one or two more before we move on. So I'm actually going to put a BR element right after this copy entity character. So I'll type in BR and tab, and here's another one. So if you wanted to display Japanese yen, you type in ampersand and then the word yen and then a semicolon. Let's take a look at this. So Control save it, Alt tab over to the browser, hit refresh here, and you can see there's the symbol for Japanese yen. Okay, so back over in Sublime Text here, I'm going to show you one more, and it won't be all that apparent. This is a weird one, but remember from back in one of the first lessons how I showed you how HTML ignores spaces. So let's put in a name here. Let's go Bob Smith. Okay, now if for some reason I wanted extra spaces to appear between the first and last name, you guys know by now this won't have the effect that I want it to. So if I save this and Alt tab back into the browser and hit refresh, you'll see that HTML only gives us one space and it ignores all the rest. Well, if I want to force spaces to appear, I can use an entity character to do it. You guys know about the BR element. That's how you can force a line break into your content. But if you want to force a space, you use an entity character to do it. So what I'm going to do here, and this looks weird, I'm going to go ahead and put one space there. That won't be ignored because the browser will respect one space. But then I'm going to type in ampersand and then NBSP semicolon. So that will give us a space. So it seems kind of crazy. You have to type in, what, 5 characters just to force a space. I'm going to go ahead and copy that entity character and paste it a few more times. And now if I save my changes here, Control S and then Alt tab back over to the browser and hit refresh, that's how I can force the spaces to appear. So again, there are all kinds of entity characters, and they start with the ampersand and they end with the semicolon, and you can look up a reference on to see what all is available to you. Now I want to continue with this idea of how the browser deals with spacing. So you saw us just a minute ago, we had to use the NBSP entity character to force spaces. By the way, NBSP stands for non-breaking space. I should have mentioned that earlier. But we are going to talk about other types of spacing now. So if we go back to Sublime Text, what I want to do is let's add inside of our body element, underneath the line that begins with Bob, let's go ahead and add a paragraph. So you already know this. There's my opening P tag and closing P tag. And if I type in a bunch of spaces and return carriages, when I look at this in the browser, I'll see, I'm going to go ahead and save this, go back over to the browser and hit refresh. You can see all those spaces are ignored. Well, there are cases when you don't want those spaces to be ignored. So what you can do is you can use what's called a pre-tag. So I'm going to change this P element into a pre-element like this, and then I'll change the closing P tag to a closing pre-tag like that. And what that will do is that will preserve all the spacing that we've left in there. So let's go ahead and look at this now. If I do Control S to save this and bounce back over to the browser and hit refresh, now you can see my spacing is, my return carriages and spacing are being respected by the browser. Now this looks kind of weird. These lines they look like they're tabbed out a bit, and that's because it's respecting all this space here. So if you don't want all that tabbing, then you kind of have to break your rules of good formatting here. So I'm going to select those two lines of code, and I'm going to do Shift Tab to outdent them all the way until I get them to the left side of the page. If I save this, I'll do Control S, and then I'll Alt Tab back over to the browser, and now you'll see that they're left aligned the way we wanted them to appear. Okay, so when you're using pre-elements, you do have to abolish the idea of indenting your code unless you want the stuff inside the pre-element to be tabbed over. So normally I would tell you that everything that goes inside of an element should be indented, but that may not be true when you're working with pre-elements. You might have to outdent them to get them to appear on the page the way you want them to. Okay, let's put our cursor underneath that closing pre tag, and I want to show you another tag that we'll be using moving forward here. It's called a div tag. So just type in div and hit tab, and let's just type in, this is a div element. Okay, now I want to go ahead and save this, and it won't look like much in the browser, but we can use these div elements to divide up our page. In the last video I showed you layout elements such as main and nav and footer and header. Well, these div elements are kind of just generic versions of those. So let's go ahead, like I said, this won't look like much when I look at it in the browser, but let's go ahead and look at it anyways. So I'm going to press Control S, Alt Tab over to the browser, and here's our div element, but I want to show you that this is a block level element. So what I'm going to do here is I'm going to press F12 to open up the developer tools. Now we haven't really dug into the developer tools like we need to yet, but I'll press this button right here and hover over the div, and you can see that it's going across the whole entire page here. So it's a block level element. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you the inline version of it, which is a span element. So let's set this up by adding a paragraph here. So I'm going to put a P element here, and then we want to announce that we're having a big sale today. So we'll say we have a big sale going on today. Okay, now what I want to do is I want to treat this text, big sale, a little bit differently than the rest of the text inside the paragraph. So I'm going to use the inline version of a div element, which is called a span. So I'm going to put an opening span tag before big sale, and then I'm going to put a closing span tag after it. Okay, and that's how I can divide up a single line into different sections. Now remember, the div element's block level, so that whatever I put inside of a div element is going to stretch out across the width of the page. A span element is inline, so it's going to make sure that this element span is only going to be just big enough to accommodate the text here, big sale. Now I am also going to add another attribute to this that we haven't talked about yet, called the style attribute. So let's add a style attribute to the opening span tag, and here's what I want you to type for the value of the style attribute, and pay attention here because you can fudge this if you don't get it just right. Background color, and then a colon, which Sublime Text put in for me, and then let's just make it be orange, I guess. So this is a preview to CSS, which we're going to learn about in the next lesson here. And that's what you should have for the value of your style attribute. And once I do that and save my changes with Control S and Alt Tab back over to the browser, I'm going to close this here. I'll hit refresh, and you should see now there's our span element with the orange background color. And you can see here that it's in line, so it's falling in line with everything else that's in line. So it's an inline element here. Okay, back over in Sublime Text here. Now, in one of the last lessons, I showed you ID attributes on elements. So go ahead, I'm going to have you type this in. I'm just going to paste it in myself right here, but underneath that last paragraph that we were working with, paste this code in. So what I've got here is an ordered list, and it has an ID attribute set to something here. Now I wanted to show you this because we're going to be using the ID attribute quite a bit once we start getting into JavaScript. So the ID attribute is pretty common. We haven't used it much in this course yet, but we'll start to see it a lot more. And it allows us to identify everything in our web page. So there's an example of an ID attribute, and we'll be seeing more of those moving forward here. Now there's another attribute that we'll see too moving forward, and it's called the class attribute. So I want to just go to this li element right here, the first li in our list, and let's add a class attribute. So we'll say class is equal to, then our quotation marks, and I guess let's just say this is an employee class. I just made that up right here. So I'm going to go ahead and actually add this class attribute to the other li elements in this list. So I'll copy that and just paste it in here. Whoops, I need the space there. That's why that didn't get color coded properly. There we go. Okay, so you will see lots of elements moving forward in this class that have a class attribute. And we'll explain those pretty quickly here once we get into CSS. All right, the next thing I want to talk about are boolean attributes. Now we saw when we were working with HTML forms that you can have a checkbox. Let's put a checkbox on this page real quick. So we want to use an input element for a checkbox, and we want to set its type attribute to checkbox. Like that. We won't worry about the name for now. We're not actually using this data for anything. And then what I want to do is, here's what we did when we were talking about forms. We set its checked attribute to true, just like this. Okay, go ahead and save the changes here. Go back over to the browser, hit refresh. Now there's our checkbox, and you can see that it defaulted to being checked because we included this checked attribute and set it to true. Now there are lots of attributes that you can use in HTML that can only be set to either true or false. If that's those are called boolean attributes. So what you can do here is, with a boolean attribute, you can omit all of this right here and just put the attribute name in there without an equal sign or a value. And just by doing this is going to say that you should set that checked attribute to true. So by default, all boolean attributes are false, and if you want to keep them false, you can just omit them all together, just like this. Because it defaults to being false, I can just omit that checked attribute altogether, and the checkbox won't be checked. But if I want it to be checked by default, I can just put the name of that attribute there. And because it's a boolean attribute, I don't need to set it equal to anything. So you will see there are quite a few attributes that are boolean, and you'll just learn about them as you go. But I wanted to show you this so that you would recognize it if you saw other people using it in their code. Now this is the same thing as this. Whoops. So, well, if I could type right here. There we go. So in either case, if I set it to true, that's exactly the same as just putting its name like that, and that's because it is a boolean attribute, and you'll learn which attributes are boolean and which aren't as we go through the course. Okay, one more. Actually, two more things I want to cover before we wrap this unit on HTML up. I want to talk about meta elements right now. So if you think way back to the first lesson, we talked about how the head element is for storing metadata. Now metadata is information about your web page, but it's not necessarily visible. You don't see it in the body of the web page. So I'm going to go ahead and I want you to add these attributes inside your head element underneath the title. I'll just paste them in to save time here. Okay, there you have it. I've added two meta elements. Now notice these are self-closing. There are no closing tags for these, so these are self-closing elements, and they have a few different attributes here. So this meta element, whose the name attribute is set to author, and the content attribute would be the author's name. So this tells the search engines that spider your page who wrote the page. This one is called the meta description tag, and its name attribute is set to description, and its content attribute should be a brief summary of what the page is about. So as the spiders or the crawlers or robots or whatever you want to call them, as they go through your page and try and build up the search results for Google and whatnot, they will look at these meta elements so that they can figure out information about the page. For example, the author and a description of the page. So there's a lot of other meta elements that you can use to help improve the search engine, to optimize your search engine results for your web page, but we won't get into those in this course. All right, last thing here, and then we're done with HTML, is how to comment your code. So I'm going to take our list right here and I'm going to comment it out. So to comment out code, you can, this is funny syntax, I don't really understand where this came from, but if I start with these characters, a less than sign, exclamation mark, and then 2 dashes, and then I want to end my comment right here, and that's just 2 dashes followed by a greater than sign. What this will do is it will comment out this list. So if I save my changes here and go back over to the browser and refresh, you'll see that my list is gone. Now it's not really gone. I can actually see the comments if I do this trick. If you right click in the browser window and choose view page source, I can see here it is right here. So it's not like it's completely invisible to your end users. But it's a nice way to, if you aren't sure you want to use the list or not, you don't want to go to the trouble of deleting it because you might have to retype it in later, you can enclose it in the comment characters. So again, to start a comment, it's less than, exclamation, dash dash, and to end a comment, it's just dash dash, greater than. Weird syntax, but whatever, that's, I don't know where that came from. Now you can also use comments to leave notes for yourself. Like for example, I'll put a to-do note here. To-do, fix this bug. So, and what I can do is I can put the comments around it, and now I'll see that when I'm writing my code, but it won't show up on the page. So commenting your code is useful for a couple of different reasons. One is to just kind of temporarily remove something from the page. And another is to leave notes for yourself. All right, that does it for our unit